I just want to thank you for making yourselves available to us today. I think it's important for campus to hear this information so that we have a common understanding. Things have changed so quickly and evolved and moved so quickly. I think any information that we would have provided would have been drastically changed, like almost within a day. At this point, based on everything we know, we believe we're at the point where the information, at least, is what I would call reasonable bounds. So, Jen, thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to share an update on the budget situation at Western Michigan University. So we have a series of slides that will detail and outline our short range and long range plans as it relates to budgets for Western Michigan. So our purpose today is to share information and to be as informative as possible about our budget picture. We also want to help our campus understand our cash position and budget and the important distinctions between those two categories, empower our community to engage productively with this information, and answer as many questions as we can. I promise to provide that information in the future. And some of this data is a snapshot in time. And part of why we brought this data today is because we feel like this snapshot has held firm or held stable for a period of time. We know that the situation continues to evolve, and we might have more details in the future, but we feel confident that the data that we're presenting today accurately reflects our understanding, again, of our short and long range plans. So our presentation is broken up into three categories. The first is understanding the environment in which we now work. The second is taking that context and understanding how it impacts WMU. And third is a focus on the future. So let's begin by talking about the environment after March of this year. So one of the things that I think is really, really important to emphasize is that every university is facing the same, I'm going to call it existential moment or same challenge. And so we can certainly look to in-state rivals. The University of Michigan, not long after the crisis emerged, asked for $1 billion line of credit to cover their $1 billion loss. Indiana University to our south is expecting similar size issues. The University of California system has estimated their loss is at about $560 million. Minnesota, $315 million. University of Arizona has gone first in many things and has been very transparent, $250 million. And then moving a little bit more to institutions like us, Kent State, just earlier this week, estimated they've lost $110 million and announced 20% budget cuts across the board. And another neighbor, the University of Kentucky, has announced that they have lost $70 million. Many of our sister institutions are just in the state of Michigan are just putting numbers around their losses, and that continues to evolve virtually every day. We know for our student base that college might have been potentially out of the reach for some, and the impact on the economy has made college perhaps out of reach for more than in the past. And then we know from some data that we'll share in just a moment that this has influenced student choice. So many of our students, nationally, students are reporting wanting to stay closer to home in case they need to return home in a crisis. One of the things that we've been proud of at Western Michigan University since about 4 years ago is switching our out-of-state or non-resident tuition to 125% of in-state, which allowed us to do a fantastic job of bringing out-of-state students in-state, and that enrollment might be at risk given some of these national projections around how students are viewing their college choice. We saw in March and continue to see that international enrollment is highly at risk given individuals' ability to travel. Many of our students come from other countries and study with us here on campus, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and so understanding that impact on international enrollment will be important. Enrollment impacts compound across campus, and so this has important implications for housing contracts, meal plans, student fee revenue for the health center, for our recreation facility. There are many things that student fee revenue supports on our campus, including extracurricular services as well as activities. And so what are students saying? This data is from Simpson Scarborough, a national higher ed research firm. This was amplified actually midweek by Inside Higher Ed as well. It was actually covered on CNN at least twice in the last 2 days. So what are our students saying? These are high school seniors are saying 53% of their family's financial situation has been directly impacted. I should note this data is over 2.5 weeks old. And so since then, unemployment has almost doubled. And so I would imagine that this number, 53% of high school seniors being impacted, is now higher, given the national picture. And it's important to note that in last week's unemployment reports, the state of Michigan was number 2 in the country, with 24% of the Michigan residents reporting sudden unemployment. For our current college students, we know that about half, or just under half, again, 2.5 weeks ago, report having their family's financial situation has been affected by COVID-19. So the reason we share this is because the enrollment data that we're counting on and that we start talking about and start planning for, it's hard for us to understand how fragile or firm that enrollment data is. So the other question that we're seeing asked and discussed is, how likely are you now not to go to college next term? And so what you see here are folks who are saying they're likely not to go. 15%, 5% are highly likely to not go. So all in, 20% of students who had planned to go to college are now considering not going, or highly likely or likely not going to college in the fall, because of financial pressures, because of social pressures, or because of uncertainty. If you've seen some of the national news around decisions about online versus on campus, these numbers move dramatically if you talk about how college will be delivered. So the cost of education, as you know, has shifted from the state as an investment to the student. And so this slide details the slope of the lines of proportion of education paid for by the student. Most recently in the 2019-2020, 74% of the cost of education was borne by our students, while 26% was paid by the state. 26% is a lot better than what could happen given the nature of revenues in our state. So currently, the state is projecting a $5.7 billion shortfall. This shortfall is this fiscal year, projected, as well as next fiscal year. History would say that higher ed, and I've seen these in live over the past 2 weeks, higher ed is the safety valve. So I think that's something that needs to be fully understood, as while we count on these funds, they are not guaranteed. And there historically have been times that the institution has not received state appropriations, either not received them or has received a significant cut in the middle of a fiscal year. And I would also point out nationally, there are 3 states that immediately withdrew state funding for their institutions over the past week.
And Jen, if I could just add, if we're going to have a mid-year executive order cut for state appropriation, we'll probably get a pretty strong signal that that's going to occur in May. May and June historically have been the months where the state makes a mid-year cut.
Thank you, Jan. And so with that context, what does this mean for us here at WMU? So to reiterate, our students pay 3 times what the state does. And so without our students, we are no longer able to function. And so just as a reminder of how our general fund budget is constructed, and this is our general fund budget. This is important to remind ourselves that this is not auxiliaries, this is general fund budget. And so oftentimes, I know in conversations I've had, it's easy to start thinking of things that are not general fund budget, but we'll talk about what each of those are here in a moment, but we're not talking about those that are funded outside of our general fund. 72% of our general fund budget of $421 million is the result of tuition and fees borne by our students at the graduate and undergraduate level. 26% is from the state of Michigan, and 2% is from other sources of revenue. The budget, tuition and fees, is $421.4 million. Designated funds, and these include gift funds or disbursements from our endowment, study abroad fees, course fees, et cetera, equal $43.1 million. And auxiliary funds, housing, dining, Miller Auditorium, Butzer Center, etc., make up about $100.1 million. When we talk about the general fund budget, we're talking about those that are not related to designated auxiliary funds. That's 421. Jan, would you like to offer any clarifications here?
Well, it's 564 million when you look at total. I would like to kind of expand on that point a little bit. Usually when we're at this point of the year, we're focused strictly on the general fund. But the COVID-19 impact has been across all university operations. And so it's really important for us to understand that other areas that had been self-sustaining at WMU are able to because of the impact of COVID-19. And, if you're looking in my area, Miller Auditorium is the perfect example. We were forced to cancel quite a few shows once you couldn't do the large participation. Obviously, student affairs, as we've had to ask our students to leave campus. So really the challenges we're facing are being experienced in every sector of WMU, and that's unique. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you. And so let's talk about general fund budget by divisions. And so again, we're talking about that $421.4 million. So of the general fund budget, 76.2% lives in academic affairs, 13.7% in business and finance, 4.7% in intercollegiate athletics, and the others make up about 1 to 1.5% each. And so there we're speaking about research and innovation, students affairs, marketing and strategic communications, the president's office, diversity and inclusion, university advancement, and government relations. And so looking at the same amount of money differently, so again, we're speaking into that $421 million. This is by expense category, not by division. 65.7 of that general fund is compensation. Another 14.6 represents institutional financial aid. Another 8.1 represents supplies and operational expenses, including equipment, travel, etc. 4.2% is representative of utilities. 4.2 is debt service. Another 1.7 are learning and research materials, and 1.5 are maintenance and custodial. So looking at and I'm speaking as the provost here, the academic affairs budget, our budget, 76.2 of the total budget is in academic affairs. So this is a breakdown of that 76.2. So 43.4% is in faculty compensation. 13.7% is in supplies, expenses, travel, and other. 23.6%, I went around, I went counterclockwise. 23.6% is in staff. 15.1 is in that institutional financial aid that lives in the academic affairs budget. And this is not federal aid. This is the aid that we pay, need-based aid and merit aid that we pay to our students. Another 1% is in part-time instructors, and another 3.2% of the total is in graduate assistantships, tuition, and stipend. And so all in, 62.7 of the general funds, of the academic affairs budget is dedicated toward instruction and aid. Jan, would you like to take the business and finance?
Certainly. So as Jen already referenced, business and finance is 13.7% of the general fund. As you drill down into our area, though, the proportions look a little different, and that's because utilities is just about 30%, and business and finance actually is responsible for the utilities for the whole organization. So it really, I would say, skews. If you took utilities out, you would see we're also in the high 60% for compensation. As you might also suspect, facility costs, so that'd be your custodial, maintenance, landscaping, 6.4%. Our supplies, 8.1%. A lot of that also has to do with contracted services such as mail delivery, snow removal. And then 1.7% insurances. Again, business and finance is responsible and kind of houses the whole insurance operation for our property insurance, general liability insurance. And so that's something you find in business and finance that you would not find in the other divisions at the university. Thank you, ma'am.
Another proportion that we discussed was the intercollegiate athletics general fund budget. They're 4.7% of the total. Of that 4.7, 41.7 is compensation, 27% is student aid, 12.7 is travel, equipment, and supplies, 6.2 conference and competition fees and licensing. Another 5% are events, tickets, and media. 4.2 medical and costs, insurance costs, and other. And then 3%, just a little over 3%, are facilities. And we talked earlier about the compound impacts. While these groups are not funded through the general fund, their funding is at risk when the university is not at full normal operations. So advancement, 91% of advancement is funded through the endowment management fee. Athletics, 40% is funded through direct revenue as a result of sporting activities, camps, etc. Auxiliaries, 95% are funded through direct revenue, including some dedicated student fees. Dining and housing are 100% funded through services, and dining, its meal plans and direct purchases at our cafes and dining facilities. Housing is through residence fees. And student affairs, this is interesting, you might have expected to see them more part of the general fund budget. 92% of student affairs as a unit is funded through auxiliary revenue. And so we've spent the last several slides talking about budgets, and that's what we're best at the university. We talk a lot about budgets because that's our planning mechanism. However, because of the direct impact on our institution in ways that are evident given some of the discussions around auxiliaries, cash flow has become a parallel problem. And it's a problem for every institution, but in a financial crisis like all of us are experiencing right now, we have to understand that the ability to meet budget every month, which is different, is run through cash, which is different than planning for next year. So we have here a graph of graphs comparing when income tends to come in and when payments go out. And so you'll see, as Jan referenced earlier, that this portion of the year is when the income to payment cycle is kind of flipped. So we get less money in because our big peaks are when tuition bills are initially paid. So that's in August and January. So it's not uncommon for us to be paying more in these months. However, income over the last several months and projected into the future might be challenging. And so for the first time since I've been here, certainly, we have to talk not only about what we look like in our budgets going forward, which are planned activities, but how we can conserve cash in the short, mid, and long term, because they're both critically important right now. Jan, is there anything you'd like to add here?
Just a couple comments. We have a very cyclical operation because of the tuition billing. And as Jen progresses, she's going to talk about the cash impact in a really short time period, 2 months on us. And so when you look at the additional expenses that WMU has incurred and has had to pay out, that again is what's creating our unique situation where it is cash and it is budget. And so, as the university deploys different tools, some of them are directed to addressing budget, others are directed to preserving cash. And I think that's hard for the general population to understand because historically we have had the ability to focus more on budget versus cash. So, but we're having to look across the landscape for every tool, and as every other college and university or every other business is doing. So we just wanted to put out there so you could kind of get a sense of when our cash comes in and when it goes out. We have a lot of items we spend cash on that we really don't have much discretion. Debt service is definitely one. And as Jen, when she was talking about the general fund and our expenses, compensation is another one that consumes a lot of our cash. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as Jan indicated, there are strategies that serve one, but not the other. So, things that we're pretty familiar with, as most institutions are. So, helping budget, but not positively influencing cash, are things like forfeiting unfilled positions, forfeiting internally funded grants, spending down reserves, and the endowment. However, helping cash that doesn't really impact our budget is a hiring freeze, because we're not spending that money, externally funded grants, salary reductions, which we know that we just experienced, that helps cash. And unless they're permanent, it does not impact budget. Suspending travel, postponing projects, canceling construction, all of those things help protect cash, but they don't impact our long range ability to meet our budget over the coming year. And so I think it's important to understand that carrying over annual leave on July 1st would add $7 million in compensation to our institution and requires us, because of accounting rules, to sequester cash. And what that means is that for every dollar we anticipate paying out in annual and sick leave, we have to hold in reserve. And so those have real cash implications immediately. And so we've talked a little bit about some of the shocks to our system since the COVID-19 executive orders required us to shelter in place. Like many universities, we offered housing, meal plan, and parking credits. We immediately had to close all of our auxiliaries: Miller Auditorium, Fetzer, West Hills, the Student Recreation Center. One notable exception is Syracuse has been operating this whole time. We had the state had approved through the last budget cycle money for both the Geological Survey and the Unified Clinics Resiliency Center, both of which we lost. As you can imagine, we had increased custodial costs in March and anticipate that in the future, including supplies, equipment, and compensation for the deep cleaning that was necessary to protect the health and safety of our students and employees. We put summer session 1 completely online. A couple of very important distinctions about how we charge distance education, not online, excuse me. The tuition rate is lower for distance education for out-of-state, and for upper division courses, we charge a different set of rates for distance education. We have paid out additional compensations for the development of online courses, as well as the faculty champions. We've lost student fee revenue. We've lost housing and dining revenue. And we're still trying to understand the impact on COVID-19, especially as we move deeper into the summer. Our endowment, as you can expect, as you saw the market's volatility over the last 6 weeks, our endowment took that same hit that many of us personally might have taken, reducing funds available for expenditures and operations. And as you know, we've canceled many, many, many events. NCAA distribution has been impacted through the cancellation of March Madness and other activities. We no longer are having any sports camps through summer 1. We've had to cancel the Medieval Congress, something that we're quite well known for and brings people from all over the country. And we canceled many study abroad programs in the middle of the spring semester, which required us to expend additional revenue or additional costs to get our students home and to refund study abroad program fees. So all of those have left us with a $45 million impact from COVID-19 from mid-March to date. And so let's talk about what this means. So just for reference, last year in the 2019-2020 budget cycle, we cut $11 million, which represented an aggregate about 3% of the general fund budget, that $421.4 million. So if we think about it, Right now, we've already lost 45 million that we had not anticipated losing. So that's the past, and that's the cash side of the equation. When we look forward, we've anticipated what best and worst likelihood looks like for our budget. So as you saw from the president's email late last week, the best that we anticipate hoping for is a $45 million loss for the next fiscal year and beyond, and that represents 11% of the $421.4 million. That best likelihood is built on several assumptions that are off to the right, that we would have a regular fall on campus with dorms open and rec open and auxiliaries open and everybody here. This also is dependent on an enrollment decline that continues to be discussed in the higher ed literature about the impact on even the most competitive universities' fall enrollments. And then a moderate funding rescission from the state. The worst likelihood, and what we're asking all of our units to prepare for, is a fall that's completely online. We have not made that decision, but we must anticipate the worst outcome. A steeper enrollment decline, which then again has those impacts on tuition fees, housing, dining, and other auxiliaries, and deeper state rescission in our funding. Given the $5.7 billion anticipated loss, we feel that that is an appropriate decision. So what we have been discussing and what was in the president's email is preparing for the worst likelihood, knowing that if it is better than predicted, it can positively influence the campus, but knowing that we need to plan for the worst. Many people have talked about the CARES Act support. So I'm going to spend a moment talking about the CARES Act, which was passed a couple weeks ago by the federal government as part of the first bailout or stimulus related to COVID-19. So the CARES Act support apportions institutions based on their Pell eligibility and their head count, a certain percentage of a pool of money. And so based on those two factors, Western Michigan University has the opportunity to access up to $15.6 million. However, 50% of that must be used in emergency student aid. So of that 15.6, no less than 7.75 million must be used to support our students. And those in emergencies, not in paying their tuition, but paying for things that occurred during the spring semester, reductions in student employment, rent, et cetera. And so we are looking to create mechanisms to distribute that aid to our spring 2020 students and look for the future to assist students, but half of that money has to be used in their direct support. It's interesting to note that that money also cannot be used to pay back losses that we have experienced. And so the 45 million that I detailed, categories of loss, that remainder, the half of I'll just say $7.5 million cannot be used to pay back COVID losses that we experienced through refunding, et cetera. But I know there's been a lot of misconceptions about that support. Most saw that 15.6 number and didn't understand the restrictions and mechanisms that we must use to distribute that money. So what does this mean moving forward? It means that we have several difficult choices. It means that our choices are not the best choices. They are the least worst choices. But we do know that on the other side of this, we will be a stronger institution. And so how are we making these decisions? First of all, we are student focused. When we talk about guiding principles, education and compassion and preparation of our students is our core mission. Every action we take will put students and their success first. This requires us to do it differently, but it also requires us to maintain the experience that makes WMU the best choice for our students at the graduate and undergraduate level. It means that we will make equitable decisions. But equitable does not mean equal. And so we will avoid a one-size-fits-all approach and focus on strategies that strengthen the institution as a whole. As a community, we must share responsibility for those decisions that serve our students over other interests, including our own. And lastly, like today represents, we will be candid and forthright. We need to demonstrate that we are accountable to our students, parents, employees, donors, taxpayers, with well-considered, clearly articulated, timely communication and decision-making. I can tell you that we have not been able to deliver much positive news, many elements of positive news lately, but that does not stop us from sharing the information as soon as we have it to help understand our situation and the decisions. We promise to keep our audiences informed through this process. And so what actions have we taken? We cannot avoid reducing personnel in our budgets. As you saw, whether it's academic affairs or the institution as a whole, almost 70% of our general fund is in compensation. And so we cannot avoid reducing personnel regardless of how personally difficult it may be. We will handle budget reductions in phases now through September. Cash preservation is accomplished through several mechanisms. We have instituted a hiring freeze. We have instituted a travel freeze. We have canceled construction. We are cutting special projects. We will work to close buildings. We have moved to 40-day payment cycles, and we are accelerating drawdowns on externally funded research and grants. There is much about this situation that we have been able to, much that we have not been able to control, and much that we will perhaps not be able to control in the future. But what we can control is understanding our finances, understanding the complexity, especially between budget and cash, which is new, sharing facts where we have them. And all of us, every one of us, it is important that we understand that we have the power and responsibility to correct inaccuracies. The reason for this presentation today is so we all share basic understanding of our situation. We need to continue to develop a high-quality student experience. We need to cut every possible expenditure and remind ourselves what our core mission of the institution is. We need to keep thoughtful questions and problem-solving coming. So we know that there are many ways that we can save money, that we can become more efficient, that we can better work together in service of our students. So share them. On the Provost webpage, we have a suggestion box. On Jan's webpage, she has Ask Jan. You can always use the info@wmich.edu email to share ideas. No idea that helps the institution become more effective and efficient is a wasted effort. We can't promise that we will implement, but we certainly know that by aggregating those great ideas, we can accomplish more than not having them. But one thing is very important is that we do not have the luxury of time. Many of these decisions are upon us right now. And so finding ways to elevate the conversation and do so perhaps outside of cycles that we're comfortable with or known to us is very, very important. I thank you for your time and attention in listening to this presentation and ask my colleague Jan Vanderclay for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Jen. We appreciate your time with us today and your attention. We know this was difficult news, news that none of us particularly want to hear, but we also know we have the WMU Bronco grit, and together we will work our way forward. We will be stronger as we move through this process. And I know we will continue to do everything we can and keep our focus on our students and how important they are to us. So we will become stronger when we emerge.